Abortion a European human right? That is the question that we'll be addressing today here on Nissa TV. In the last few months here in the European Parliament in Brussels, this matter has been up for huge debate. A report known as the Estrela report, named after the Portuguese socialist MEP, David Estrela, who wrote it, suggested that European women should have access to safe and legal abortion and the right to access healthcare and, of course, adequate sexual education. But the Parliament didn't back this report, and the MEP David Estrela got over 200,000 emails against it. The piece of document may have been binned for the moment, but the debate is still going on, and that's why we've invited a number of people to the EP today to discuss it. Here with me today is Viviane Teitelbaum, Belgian Liberal politician and also president of the European Women's Lobby. Marie Hildingson from Sweden, she's the Secretary General of the European Federation of Catholic Families. And Irishman David Lundy, who's based here in Brussels, working for the press department of the European United Left. Thank you very much for joining me here today. And just to give our viewers a little bit of a snip of what this whole Australia report that's been so debated about is all about, here's a little clip that we've borrowed from European TV. Please take a look.
For the Conservatives, the mere idea of it went against European values, and they protested against plans to safeguard sexual and reproductive rights, which included better education and access to treatment for adolescents. At the vote on Tuesday, the report was thrown out.
Em 2002, o Parlamento Europeu aprovou relatório com conteúdo semelhante ao do meu. Em 2013, rejeitou. Significa que há uma regressão.
So Marie, you published on your website 12 points why people should vote against, why MEPs should vote against this report. Why?
Yes.
Why do you feel so strongly against it?
Well, this report, the European Federation of Catholic Family Association, that represents 15 member states, has brought a lot of attention because it goes against the right of parents to choose the education they want for their children. This is a universal human right for parents to choose the kind of education they want to give their children. But this report, which dealt with sexual education, as you mentioned, only considered parents as one amongst other stakeholders, while the parents are the first and primary educators of their children.
We feel that every human being in Europe, may it be a woman or a man, should be able to be recognized in its fundamental rights, democratic rights, and women's rights are part of those fundamental rights. And so, therefore, it's important for us that sexual and reproductive health rights are recognized as fundamental rights. It's all about the core values of Europe. It's about respecting the independence, the freedom of women in all their choices for everything that concerns their lives. And so we feel, yes, that the rejection of the Estrela report is a sad day for human rights as it's a sad day for women's rights.
But on the other hand, for your organisation, it was a happy day, and I'm sure you did send one of those 200,000 emails. I mean, I don't know if that was a bug that got in the system or it really was 200,000 associations who took time to send an email to David Estrela, but
we did write to MEPs, but I think it was mainly citizens who wrote. I don't think there are that many NGOs, by the way, across Europe who could take this challenge on board to write as many emails. So it shows that it did affect citizens, and many citizens who were very concerned, but also because there were other things in this report, and there was the issue of abortion, and we do know that this issue is not at all a question on which there is a common position among the member states. And it is a very difficult issue. We have to accept that, and we have to be able to discuss it.
Absolutely, and that's why we're here today, because that's the problem. In countries like my own in Ireland, these discussions are usually just shoved under the table and people are afraid to talk about these issues. I mean, what needs to change here? As I said earlier, this report has just been put in the bin for the rest of this parliamentarian term. If you ask the Commission what they're going to do about it, well, Viviane Reding, the Justice Commissioner, will say, well, you know, that's competence of the EU member states. I'm not going to get into that. But at the end of the day, it's 2014. We can't just, you know, hide these matters. We have to have a frank discussion. So what should be done?
Well, I think, first of all, yes, debate should be, we have to have a debate. That's essential. It's a democratic way to deal about things. Now, I think that women's rights are universal rights, and they cannot be defined according to who is in power, according to who is, what culture, what region, what, you know, it has to be anchored in universal values. So that's very important. important. Now, we also feel that it's something that has to be pushed forward. We are in 2014. How can we possibly be debating women's rights and freedom of choice and freedom for women to decide over their body, their fertility, the way they're going to handle their own life? We are 52% of the population and still a political minority. So yes, women's associations are doing advocacy work to be able to counter this.
But I would like to go back to the issue of what a right is, and there is a right to life. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights declares this very clearly. The Fundamental Rights Charter of the European Union declares it very clearly. And the European Court of Justice has recently, in the case Bristol, declared against Greenpeace, declared that the human embryo must be protected from conception. So there is a conflict of rights if we are only to consider abortion as a woman's right. So there is another person involved, directly involved, which is the child to be born. There is also a third person involved, which is of course the man. No life comes to life without two adults, a man and a woman.
No, I want to react on that because of course it's the right of life, but not God-given right of life. It's the right of life, the life that women are living, and also the threat of their lives when there is sometimes a risk and where abortion needs to be done, but also the right to choose their life.
Voilà, that was an
embryo of a few days or a few weeks is not considered to be life, but a woman's life is considered to be life. So I don't think it's a choice between a life when you talk about an embryo of a few days or a few weeks and a woman's life.
This is it. It's the idea of having the choice. You know, if you're in a certain predicament, we'll come on to that now. We're going to go and have a bit of a chat about Ireland, a case study situation with David Lundy, who's joining us here. He works at the press department here for the European United Left group, but he's also just an Irish bloke who's quite concerned about these issues and has decided to come and join us here. So we're not just a lot of women here on Nissa TV today sharing our views. So let's talk about the situation in Ireland, David. I mean, at the end of the day, the reality is seemingly 11, according to reports, 11 people are packing their bags each day to take the boat or the plane to the UK to get an abortion. You know, when is Ireland going to wake up to the fact that that's happening and acknowledge it and do something about it?
Well, I think there has been a change recently. Last summer there was new legislation introduced to, after a long 20-year period of gestation, this legislation that the Supreme Court in 1993 declared was necessary was finally introduced in 2013. Which allows abortion still under extremely restricted circumstances, but abortion is now allowed in Ireland to save the life of the mother. It's still not allowed in cases of rape or incest or fetal abnormality. The whole change in legislation came after the death of Savita Halappanavar, which went kind of global in the media. It was extremely followed. It was talked about here in Brussels as well.
Just for those of you who aren't familiar with Savita, was a young healthy girl who went into hospital in Galway in the west of Ireland with a pain in her back. A few days later she died.
Yeah.
Many say that could have been prevented if she was allowed to have an abortion in that sense.
Yeah, she was. She developed a sepsis after she began to miscarry, but the doctors would not terminate her pregnancy until the fetal heartbeat had stopped, which took 3 days, and both lives were lost. I mean, I don't know if the doctors did it under ethical grounds or certain religious beliefs, perhaps, I don't know, but also there are cases where doctors are afraid to do anything because of the lack of legal clarity in Ireland. It's been slightly clarified since this new legislation came into force this year. But the lack of clarity means that there's a fear in hospitals of legal repercussions because of the way the Constitution is worded, because we have a contradictory assessment from the Supreme Court that dates from the early 90s. It has been clarified, but still women do not have access to safe termination procedures in cases, those 3 cases of rape, incest and fetal abnormalities.
And I've seen reports where women who do have to leave the country, for example, to get an abortion, you know, sometimes they don't even tell their partner. They're so embarrassed and they're so ashamed. I mean,
yeah,
you know, it's not something you want to reveal over a dinner party in Ireland. Oh, by the way, I had just had an abortion. I mean, it's just not discussed. But meanwhile, in Spain, for example, or countries like Belgium, which has a lot of rights for various different minority groups, it's absolutely no taboo.
There's a huge stigma attached to the issue, which compounds the kind of stress that women and girls are going to be in when they decide to have an abortion. Obviously, it's an extremely difficult decision to make. Never mind the fact that you then have to travel. You have to sort out accommodation. It costs upwards of €1,000 with travelling, and it's not like in Belgium where you can drive to the next country. In Ireland, the geography plays a role because you have to book a flight. You have to. It's a much bigger deal. They estimate about €1,000 and upwards for the procedure, the medical costs, accommodation, and then other things come into play like time off work, childminding services. Extremely stressful decision to make, and then you add all this stress on often very young people's lives. And
so Marie, based on that fact, the fact that 11, and some of these are only young teenagers and they're off, they go on their own, like completely perplexed. How do you feel about that? Do you not think they should have a choice in the matter?
I do believe that there is a matter of taking care of every person and trying to prevent these situations. What is done by policymakers in Ireland, I can't say because I don't work in Ireland, but what is done by policymakers across Europe, within the European Union, to make sure that the conditions are satisfying for those who would like to keep their child. That's the first thing, because we do know that there are many women also who feel that they are not capable perhaps of raising a child on their own, taking care of a child, and that is extremely important. And then secondly, when it comes to these very young women, of course there is the matter of education. But what are we offering today to those young people who want to learn more about not only about their sexuality, but also how to make a relationship last and to have a stable context in which they may express their sexuality? I do think it's a much more complex issue than just bring it into the individual situation.
And one of the worries is the big gap really in sexual education in Ireland. I mean, David, you're probably as well familiar with that. The problem is in Ireland the teachers are actually too embarrassed. In some cases the principal is the only person who can do the sexual education because all the other people are absolutely too embarrassed, which is...
And this...
You want to say something?
Well, yes, because in the countries where you have a legal and safe abortion, you do have a lot about education on contraception, education on sexual health in schools. And in those countries, the amount of abortions that are being done is much lower than in countries where abortion is not legal or safe. And I want to mention also that every 9 minutes, a woman is dying in the world because of an illegal abortion. And so all this has to be taken into consideration when you talk about those issues.
Illegal abortion, we didn't even get onto that topic. You wanted to say something very
briefly. I do not agree with what was said about abortion and sexuality education and the link. We have the case of Sweden, which is the first member state to introduce compulsory sexual education with very high
Sweden is the role
abortion
model,
rates.
isn't it, for that, all the Scandinavian countries. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me here. This was the first show, our pilot show for Nissa TV. We'll be going to be discussing women's rights all around Europe and beyond in the languages of English, French and Arabic. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll leave you now in the very capable hands of our Arabic reporter, Leila.